If a person took a moralistic view of Genesis, they would be swimming upstream. Let me describe what I mean by that. If a pastor or if a commentator or if a Bible student took, or a VBS teacher or Sunday school teacher took a moralistic approach to Genesis, to the characters in Genesis, they would be swimming against the current. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine a sermon series where when we got to Abraham, I had a poster cutout of Abraham on the stage. And I talked in all the ways in which you should be like Father Abraham. And we got done with Abraham, then we encountered maybe Sarah or Isaac, and each time we took a cardboard cutout and put it on the stage and said, okay, here's all the ways you should be like this person. That sermon series would be the biggest stretch that's ever come to this pulpit. Because you can't make people like this look good. Because they're not good. Genesis is not about a moralistic approach to the characters of Scripture. And if ever there was a passage that proves that dogmatically in Genesis, it's this one. Because you have God choosing the line that He's going to bless out of Isaac and Rebekah, in Jacob and Esau, He's choosing the line before either son has done anything, good or bad. This is a huge point that the Apostle Paul makes in Romans 9. He's saying God chose Jacob's line before either him or Esau had a record. So the point is not about Jacob's morality or Esau's lack of morality. They're both scoundrels. The point is that God is redeeming humanity through sinful people. And that every time they drop the ball, He catches it. And you begin to see that the one moving the ball is not humanity, it's God. It might have a face like Abraham's or Isaac's or Rebekah's or Sarah's, but it's really God. And Genesis is all too crystal clear in showing you how it can't be Abraham, because if it were up to Abraham, Sarah would be having kids from another person because he gave her away twice to another man. If it were up to Sarah, Abraham would be having other kids from someone besides her because she pushed him to Hagar. So the point of Genesis is not a moralistic point. It's not be like Abraham, be like Sarah. As much as there are things we can praise and hope to emulate, that's not the main point. It's surely not the only point. We have too much evidence of how big they mess up. The point is for you to see at every turn God's unyielding commitment, His powerful strength, and His love that never breaks, never gives up, and goes on until His Son Jesus finishes the job. That's the point of Genesis. So that you step back and say, man, God won't stop at anything to redeem humanity. Nothing can thwart His plan. Nothing can stop it. Because if it could, surely this ragtag group of people would have messed it up. This is the idea. And mind you, you could replace Abraham with James or Ben or Tom. It would be any of us the same. So as much as it's not emulating them, it's also not only criticizing them, because as you criticize them, you've got fingers pointed to yourself. So the author of Genesis wants you to see that amidst all obstacles, God will overcome what Satan sowed in the garden, and Adam and Eve took the bait. He will overcome that. And so this is what the book of Genesis is about. Sin is unleashed in Adam and Eve. And it's as if the author wants to take you and show you, as the reader, just how bad sin is. Just how awful it is. Just how corrupting it is. And as the first illustration of just how bad sin is, the narrator shows you God himself, who up to this point has only brought things into being. He's only brought forth life and order. That's all we've seen God do. And as the first action of God, besides talking to the serpent and Adam and Eve, God, the originator of life, the inventor of life outside himself, goes to an animal and he slaughters it. You remember as a kid, when you sort of knew the jig was up in a very bad way based on your parents' reaction to something that just happened? I mean, you can tell when they're like not happy, and you can tell when it's like desperate mode, whatever that is, whether it's a car accident or whatever. And you see in their face, and their face communicates to you, I don't know how this is ever going to get better. This is really, really, really bad. The way Dad's responding to this crisis, whatever it is. Well, when Adam and Eve saw God slaughter an animal, when all he's done is brought forth life, it's bad, bad. It's really, really bad. In other words, it's gotten as bad as it could get. It's a sobering note. I don't know if you've ever dreamed a dream that was so terrible that you woke up and you couldn't have been happier to wake up and realize it was a dream. Some of you know that you wake up to that nightmare and it's the nightmare you went to sleep with because it's true. Some of you have experienced that. You were hoping it was a dream, but you wake up and you sigh with the weight of the experience that is real. It's not fake. Some of you, beyond that, might know that the nightmarish experiencing that you're experiencing happened because of your sin. And that's about as low as it can get. Some of you know people that probably woke up the next day after a certain day and realized their life as they knew it was over based on the decision they made or got caught making previously. This is what it was like for Adam and Eve. The one who's only brought forth life now brings death. So the author wants you to see that God himself is causing death now, and that's what sin did. And of course, that's a foreshadowing of him slaughtering the animal to give skins to Adam and Eve. It's a foreshadowing of them being clothed with his son's righteousness through his bloody death. So sin is so bad that it tears the fabric of the Trinitarian household apart. Separates the son from his father. That's how bad sin is. And the author of Genesis wants you to know how bad sin is so that you can be all the more impressed when God uproots it. Told that there's a missionary that came to a native people, and the people said, in God's sovereignty, if God controls all things, why did he wait so long for you to come to us? The missionary responded, I can only imagine that he wanted to allow the roots of sin to grow as deep as they could so that he looks all the more spectacular when he uproots that root system and tree. So Genesis wants the reader to know just how bad sin is, how bad this new dark reality is. And so first it has God kill an animal, the originator of life, but it doesn't stop there. Next we see Cain kill Abel. Next, we see Adam, who was so unbelievably satisfied with one wife, Eve. He says, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. He's just enthralled with this female, this singular female. Then we see a man named Lamech who takes 2 wives for himself, as if to say, God doesn't have it all together. The more the merrier, and we're going to take them like property, like cattle. This is Lamech. The reader says, do you see how ugly it's getting? Adam was overjoyed with one woman as his wife. Lamech needs 2. Beyond that, God gave out perfect justice with Cain. Lamech says, if anybody strikes me, I'll kill them 70 times over. And Lamech is the one in charge of civilization. So what the reader gets from that is that civilization is now, instead of being run by God, who's a perfect, just God, he's good, now it's run like tyrants like Lamech. It's like the Wild West, that you can't be too careful because men like Lamech are in charge. So it went from a safe to a scary place. And in the background of Lamech's history, you have Seth and Enosh that are depicted as being very weak. And they're the ones that are like a little seed of grass that are swirling around in a pool of water. And you think, how is that going to do anything? But it's out of this weak seed that God will upend all the sin in creation, and he'll make it right. I had the boys pull some creeping Charlie this week in the yard, and we're scattering grass seed, and I emptied the dehumidifier, and I'm trying to like slightly water the grass seed without like pouring it too heavy. But I ended up pouring it too heavy, and the grass seed just went into this little pool. And I watched as these tiny little grass seed just kind of floated around the pool. And that's how small God starts. With these little weak men like Seth and Enosh. And he says to the reader, I'm going to upend all sin through this line. You watch this line. But he's not finished in chapters 4 to 11 showing you how bad sin is. And so chapter 5, he just shows how people died. They died, they died, they died. It says over and over and over. And he died. And the reader wants you to picture yourself in each tent, in each household. I don't know if you've ever been there when someone breathed their last breath, but what a grisly, awful experience that is to see life leave a human body. But the reader wants you in Genesis 5 to picture that. This guy, this guy, this guy, giving up his last breath. Because he wants you to see how awful sin is and what it does to the world. But amidst Genesis 5, you see a little glimmer of light named Enoch that doesn't die. He goes and he's taken by God because he walked with God. And humanity, the reader looks and says, okay, there's hope. There's still hope. In Genesis 6 through 9, the narrator shows you the extent, how far-reaching sin is, in showing you that it's worldwide. Sin isn't isolated. It's spread through humanity. I was reading a couple weeks ago an article from The Atlantic on if the United States is ready for a global epidemic of sickness like Black Death. How is the United States prepared for such an event? And it was a lengthy, extensive article on how the different presidents have handled things. The Black Plague, which killed between an estimated, it's hard to know what happened in the 14th century, but they estimate anywhere from 75 to 200 million people. Samuel Cohn, professor of medieval history at the University of Glasgow, explains this. He says, it is thought that the Black Plague spread at a rate of a mile or more a day. But other accounts have measured it in places to have averaged as far as 8 miles a day. By contrast, he writes, scientists in South Africa, New Orleans, and other places affected by the bubonic plague in early 20th century devised experiments to clock their plagues spread and found it moving no faster than 8 miles a year. These extreme differences, he writes, in the spread of the Black Death and the bubonic plague of modern times are seen despite the revolutions in transport with steam power, railway, and by the 20th century, automobiles. In other words, Black Death was unlike anything that we've ever seen before. But the narrator in Genesis wants you to know that sin spread faster. And besides Black Death, where some survived, nobody has outrun or outsurvived sin and the havoc that it brings and the death that it brings. So he wants you to know it's far-reaching. And so in the flood narrative, God destroys all humanity save one, Noah in the ark and his family, and you see this seed swirling around in the water, and you think, how is it ever going to take root and overcome the globe the way God wants it to? And then you see his seed, Noah, lying naked and drunk on the floor of his tent. And I don't know if you've ever been sick. I was sick a couple weeks ago, many of you know, and when I get sick, it's like the whole house vibrates. It's an awful experience. I'm surprised my neighbors don't hear me get sick. But I don't know if you've gotten sick recently. This flu's been going around like crazy. But you have the thought, like, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but after you upchuck, you ask yourself, okay, how many stages of this is it going to be? Is it going to be like stage 1, 12 o'clock at night, then 3 o'clock in the morning, then 5? Like, how many times is this going to happen? Because I cannot stand it. And what an awful feeling it is when stage 2 comes and you were hoping it wouldn't, or stage 3 comes and you were hoping it wouldn't. But when you see Noah lying naked and drunk on the floor of his tent, you know that the sickness hasn't left. It's still there. It's in Noah too. He's got Black Death too. So this new Adam who's going to create all humanity through he and his wife and his kids, he's infected too. And so their offspring goes and creates essentially another worldwide moment that would invite the flood again in the Tower of Babel. All humanity gets together and turns against God. And God this time, instead of destroying humanity, graciously, mercifully confuses their languages. But all the way, you see God keeping this ball moving, keeping his messianic line moving along. He is the one that moves it, not his people. His people are weak, sinful, and frail. It's God that's doing the work to bring us to the Messiah. And out of the Tower of Babel, the narrator traces down to one person and his wife named Abraham and Sarah. And he says that multiple nations will come from him. But there's a trick, there's a problem. They have a natural barrier. They're barren, old, postmenopausal, not sleeping together. But there's not just a natural barrier, there's also a sin barrier. Like I said, Abraham gave his wife away twice. Sarah pushed him to Hagar. And yet God sticks to the course. And so they give him a child. And even then, Abraham is begging God to go a different route through Ishmael instead of Isaac. So at every turn, seemingly, humanity is not getting along with God's plan. And God's saying, stick to the plan. Stick to the plan. Trust me. I will deliver the football to the end zone. Trust me. I'm getting it done. So they have a child. They have Isaac. Isaac's older. He's a bachelor, 37 years old, not married yet. He's passive. And he's not finding a wife. God connects the dots, and he brings her Rebekah miraculously. And then we find that Rebekah too is barren. Again, God is showing humanity. Do you see how I can overcome every trip up, every fall, every natural problem, and every sinful problem? I can fix it all. Just watch this plan unravel. Every time you think the jig is up, I'm going to show up. And so then Isaac calls on God, and Rebekah, we find in this passage, conceives. And if you think at this point it might be time for it finally to turn golden, we find that Rebekah, after 20 years of marriage, conceives. You think, yes! Picture her looking at the sonogram. It's awesome. We're excited. Rebekah, who is a very tough woman. We know she's tough because of how the servant found her, right? She made numerous trips up and down these stairs to the well and fed his and watered his camels and him numerous times. So she is not a weak woman. She's a very strong woman. She gets pregnant with these two, and she asks in the Hebrew, essentially, why am I even here? The pregnancy is so awful. The Hebrew word that's used for them fighting, Jacob and Esau fighting in Rebekah's womb, is the same Hebrew word that's used when someone crushes a human skull. That's the word that's used. So what you need to imagine is that her tummy, her belly, is convulsing. She questions why she's alive, why she's pregnant. She wants out of this. And she's not a weak woman, very strong woman. One commentator said Jacob and Esau's first battlefield was their mother's womb. And then we see from the text this morning that the battlefield enters onto Earth's stage. It leaves the womb. How do we know that? Well, because Jacob's hand was clutching Esau's heel as he exited. It's kind of funny. Isaac and Rebekah named Jacob basically grabber of the heel. But it probably meant when he was born, like protector. Like I'm with the army. I'm in the rear of the army. I'm watching over them. But once you meet Jacob, you realize that this word morphs into being a heel grabber or an overreacher or a deceiver. So Jacob, even though he is going to be the one to rule Esau, is an awful human being. He wants to be first. He wants to essentially pull Esau back so that he can come out first. This is the idea. And it's not just Jacob that's a scoundrel from the beginning. It's also Isaac and Rebekah. This text demonstrates just how radically human they are. Isaac has his favorite. His favorite son is Esau, for very naturally understandable reasons. Who is Esau? Well, he's an excellent hunter. He smells of the outdoors. Fast forward to our day where not as many people hunt for their livelihood. Esau would have been the one who would have been the star quarterback. He would have been the one where the dad preened on the sidelines, "That's my son." You see number 35, the quarterback? He's mine. That's who Isaac would have been. He would have been excited for Esau to come home and tell, "How many touchdowns did you throw at the away game today, son? How many did you get? How many did you run in?" All the while, Jacob's listening, see? Jacob's hearing it. There's no question. The narrator makes very clear that Isaac preferred Esau. Esau would have been the one whose name is plastered on the gym walls for all the records he set at his high school. This is Esau. Isaac loves him because of how he cooks the food and he gets the food just right. So you get Isaac and you're like, "Really, Isaac? That's what catches you? How far he can hit a baseball? How far he can throw a football? Really? How he cooks your food? That's what steals your intimacy with a person? That's what casts your lot with Esau? Everything that's just so trivial?" And we wondered then, Why Esau ends up despising his birthright for a bowl of stew? Bowl of soup? Where did he learn it? Well, apparently he learned it from his dad. You got Jacob. He's preferred by Rebekah. Why? Is Rebekah preferring Jacob because Jacob got the promise? Is there something in a faith system where Rebekah said, you know, I'm going with God's man? It's possible. I tend to think not quite. Jacob's more quiet. He's more bookish. He's more reserved. He's not quite the life of the party like Esau. Doesn't have as many friends. Not outwardly as impressive or loud. Doesn't always have a story to tell. Big fish story like Esau does. But why did Rebekah prefer him? Did she like his quietness? Did she like that he was in the house? Did he listen to her? Was he sensitive to her? Was it for more personal, selfish, kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours sort of reasons? Very possibly. But you got to ask, where did Isaac get it? Where did Isaac get this life of preferment? Well, if you trace back to his history, you know that Abraham preferred Ishmael over him. And even though Ishmael's out of Isaac's life for much of his life, you got to wonder, did Isaac sense it in his dad? Did he sense that Abraham really preferred Ishmael? Maybe he did. Was he compared to Ishmael growing up by Abraham? Because Jacob clearly learns preferment from Isaac, right? Because Jacob prefers Joseph clearly, and all the brothers know it. Did Jacob learn it from Isaac? Very likely. Did Isaac learn it from Abraham? Possibly. I don't know if you've ever seen or experienced a parental preferment, or if you've witnessed it. There's one instance that I'm thinking of. It's not in this church. It's not in my family. None of you know about it. Where I've watched from the background parental preferment. And it's a very sad human affair. When all the siblings joke with the parent about them preferring a certain kid, and no one can really argue it. It's really sad, in my opinion. It's so human. It's so base. It's so unfortunate for the other kids to experience that from mom and dad. Such a sad event. All to show you who God's dealing with. He's not just dealing with Jacob and Esau. He's also dealing with Isaac and Rebekah. So it's in this scene of sibling rivalry and parental favoritism that God is active and present. These are all painted very humanly by the narrator. Jacob, Esau comes, and James did a good job reading it this morning. What a cold, calculated individual Jacob is. Esau comes in, he says, man, I'm starving. Can I have some of that soup? Jacob very quickly says, sell me your birthright. Esau says, I'm going to die. What good is it to me? Of course, hyperbolizing. He's not going to die. He's just imprudent. And he says, fine, I'll do it. Jacob says, swear to me now. In the Hebrew, commentators point out it's like staccato. Just boom, 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 boom. Just what a cold, calculated individual Jacob would have been in this interaction with Esau. So you see, all through Genesis, the narrator's particular point is, reader, I want you to see how awful humanity is from start to finish, worldwide, and also God's own people that he's working with. And as you see how awful humanity is, I want you to picture Jesus, and I want you to picture his shoulders and the weight on his shoulders of humanity's sin. And I want you to watch Jesus slouch more and more and more and more and more and more and more to where you can officially call him the man of sorrows, who carried our iniquities. I want you to see all these people of whom Jesus bore their sin. And then as you read, I don't want you to separate yourself from these characters. I want you to see the characters in yourself. C.S. Lewis, I read recently, said something to the effect of, with good literature, a person feels like 1,000 different people without ever changing himself. Like he's still him, but he feels like him, or she feels like her. You can relate. Good literature helps you relate with the characters so you feel like them even though you're still yourself. This is exactly how the Bible is written. These people aren't meant to be a cardboard cutout or somebody that you can thumb your nose at. There's somebody that you're supposed to see their features in the mirror, in your soul. And friends, this is God. God overcomes all the natural obstacles like barrenness, and he overcomes all the sinful obstacles like Abraham giving his wife away to another man. And this passage makes dogmatically clear that it's God who's doing the work, not based on man's morality, because he chooses Jacob before he was even born. And what's the sad point of this text? The sad point, catch this, is that God is redeeming humanity in an amazing way. And Isaac is caught up with Esau, and Rebekah is caught up with Jacob, and Jacob's caught up with Jacob, and Esau's caught up with Esau, and no one is caught up with God. That's the sad truth of this text. That all these people are walking around busy little affairs. I got to do this, and it's all working towards this grand scheme of themselves. Isaac feels good because he's living through Esau's life effectively. Rebekah feels good because she's living through Jacob's life. Jacob's all about Jacob. Esau's all about Esau. And nobody's about God. When God is the one behind and before all of them working out majesty. He's bringing them back to the garden. He's doing the most epic thing that's ever done on planet Earth. He's uprooting the tree of sin that's got its roots down through humanity. He's going to remake Earth. And these four people are concerned about four people. It's so sad. It's so trivial. And the reader's saying, Isaac, don't you realize what's happening here? Rebekah, don't you see what God's doing? Do you remember hearing about the Garden of Eden? He's bringing that back through you, no less. Esau, are you catching the flavor, not of the soup, but what of God's doing? Jacob, wait for God to bring you in the right way. It's already yours. You don't have to scheme to get it. I want to read to you, I've referred to it before, but I want to read you a portion of the voyage of the Dawn Treader. And in this voyage, these individuals, this ragtag group of people are traveling looking for these lords that were left on different islands, and they're coming to tell them, hey, you can come home now. Your mission's over. Everything's good. And so they're trying to field these lords that were left there, and they're looking over each island, and on this one island they can't find one, and they get to a pool of water, and at the bottom of the pool of water they see like a golden statue that's in the shape of a man. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on with this, and they're kind of in the water trying to pull out this statue to see what's going on. And as Edmund gets close to the water, the toes of his boots turn to gold. And as you can imagine, the group dynamic begins to change pretty radically because this water turns things to gold. Okay? So just listen as it goes. But I want you to catch the triviality of the people there and what they're concerned with when there's someone much greater around them. Just listen. Get back! Back from the water, all of you at once. They all did and stared at him. Look, said Edmund. Look at the toes of my boots. They look a bit yellow, began Eustace. They're gold. Solid gold, interrupted Edmund. Look at them, feel them. The leather's pulled away from it already, and they're as heavy as lead. By Aslan, said Caspian. You don't mean to say, yes, I do, said Edmund. That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it got so heavy. And it was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot. And it turned the toe caps into gold. And that poor fellow at the bottom, well, you see. What a narrow shave we've had, said Edmund. Narrow indeed, said Reepicheep. Anyone's finger, anyone's foot, anyone's whisker, or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water at any moment. All the same, said Caspian, we may as well test it. He stooped down and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then very cautiously he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather that he dipped. What he drew out was a perfect model of heather made of the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. The king who owned this island, said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, would soon be the richest of all kings of the world. I claim this land forever as a Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind all of you to secrecy. Who are you talking to, said Edmund. I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way around. I'm of the four ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you are under allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it, said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst thing of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Oh! Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw what she had seen. Across the gray hillside, above them, gray for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise and without looking at them, and shining as if he were in bright sunlight through the sun, had in fact gone in. Past, as though the sun had in fact gone in, past with slow pace, the hugest lion that human eyes had ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterward, he was the size of an elephant, though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse. But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan. And nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep. What were we talking about, said Caspian. Have I been making a fool of myself? Sire, said Reepicheep, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once, and if I might have the honor of naming this island, I shall call it Deathwater. I want you to see in this passage that all of these people instantly are concerned about their personal welfare, and they miss that the king, Aslan, is watching, and he has something far superior than gold in mind for them. And friends, that's what it is in this text. You got all these very human people, and you've got the divine at work in their midst, and they all have got eyes on the wrong thing, the wrong person. One of my favorite quotes is by G.K. Chesterton. And in this quote, he transitions so well from being in a very common experience and instantly going from a common everyday experience to mystery, to worship, to awe. Listen to how he says it. He says this, we thank a man for passing the mustard. So you're sitting at the table, you pass the mustard, this guy passes the mustard. You say, thank you. Is there indeed nothing that we can thank for the man who passes it? For the great, fat, living, two-legged, two-eyed fairy tale, who by the mystical avenues of ears and hands is magically agitated to pass the mustard? So you got this big guy at the table passing the mustard, and he's kind of annoyed because he's stopping to eat while he passes it. And G.K. Chesterton says, listen, you thank him, but do you ever just scoot your chair back and say, God, thank you for creating a person with eyes and ears and hands that are just mystically created. So a place from commonality to worship. And friends, I share that with you because I want you to see what the narrator's communicating here. That in the midst of all the humdrum affairs of life, God is at work doing something majestic. Are you aware of it? Are you watching it? Because we're going to get to the end of Genesis, and Genesis is going to end with a phrase that Joseph brings about how his brothers sold him into slavery and how it worked actually for their good. And he says this in Genesis 50:20, as for you, Joseph saying to his brothers that sold him into slavery, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And what we find here is what Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Esau all were doing for evil, God was majestically turning it for good. He was causing good to come out of all this. And it causes us to push our chair back and say, God, you're amazing to work with the likes of them and the likes of me. Patiently getting it done. I want to close with two brief points of application. What are the takeaways from this morning's talk? First, set your mind on things above. Set your mind on things above. Were Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's minds on things above or below? Come on now. Below. Totally below. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says in Colossians 3:1-6. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. This is a command, friends. Set your mind, position your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness. All that we see present in Jacob and Esau and Isaac and Rebekah. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming. It's as though this verse could have been said to these four individuals. Stop putting your things on the earth, on the stuff below. Put your things in your thoughts on what God's doing. We'll spend more time on Jacob and Esau, Lord willing, when I return. But for now, it's enough for the narrator in showing you the little pericope about Esau wanting the soup and Jacob conniving to get Esau's birthright. Commentators believe, and I agree, that that's the narrator of Genesis' way of saying this. Look, God chose Jacob before him and Esau did anything, good or bad. But we want you to know that Esau and Jacob willfully acted upon what God sovereignly ordained. They were all in. They were all in. If you said to Jacob or Esau, please don't. Listen, later you're going to weep over this. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Esau would say, if you don't step out of the way, I'll push you out of the way. And if you don't move when I push you, I'll do worse. I want my soup. Okay? Nothing doing. If you said to Jacob, Jacob, trust God. He's going to get you this birthright. You don't need to do it all on your own. He would have said, you have your ways, I have mine. In other words, this is the narrator's way of saying they both wanted it the way they got it. Somehow, human responsibility and the sovereignty of God work in perfect harmony. But God is God, and we follow. So first, I want you to set your mind on the things above. So whatever trivialities you feel like you're caught up in, whatever baneness of existence you think you're in, whatever doldrums you experience, the Apostle Paul, Scripture, commands that you have your mind go up and not be focused on this stuff. It's a command from Scripture, friend. And we need to help each other when we sense our friends or our spouses or our kids looking to the earthy stuff, either the good or the bad, to set your minds on the things above. And then second and last, this text should cause you to find your strength from above. That you should find your strength from above. So appreciative of the scriptures chosen for this morning, songs sung. The Romans doxology comes from Romans 11. And in that passage and in the song, Paul writes, what can you give to God that he didn't already give to you? What can you give to God that he needs to return to you? Does God have a single counselor? Does he have anybody that counsels him? The answer is no to both. In other words, all things are from him, through him, and to him. So here's the thing. If in Genesis, God majestically works out our salvation, bringing this line to Jesus, isn't God also in charge of working out your righteousness today? You making right choices today, giving you the strength to make right choices today. Is that on you now? Now that, for those of you who are saved, is it on you now to do righteousness? Or is God the one that carries your righteousness too? He carried your salvation in Christ. Did Christ also carry your righteousness from now until you meet him face to face? And the answer is yes. So friends, this may sound sacrilegious. You don't serve God. I don't serve God. I can't serve God. What can I serve him? He doesn't need anything. He has it all. He provides it all. You think, hey, that's a stretch, because, well, just listen to the Bible. Acts 17, 24 and 25. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. What's left out of everything? So, I don't serve God. What the Bible's getting at here is that when we approach God, the best way to approach God is not with something in our hands, but asking God to put strength in our hands to do what's right. That's how we approach God. God is the one in Genesis that sets himself apart as finishing the mission, no matter how bad humanity might want to screw it up, good or bad humanity, he finishes the mission. So if he finishes the mission, that's a person that you want to go to receive strength to finish your mission. The mission he has set out for you. Look at 1 Peter 4:11. Whoever serves as one let him serve as one by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. So friends, God accomplished your salvation, and he also will accomplish every good thing you do that's truly good. To where you'll look back on it and you say, yeah, I participated. I was there. I saw it happen through me. But only God gets the glory. Because if I could have messed it up, well, I tried like 3 times before I actually did the right thing. That's Abraham's story. That's Sarah's story. And that's every one of our stories. It is God who provides the strength. So stop trying to do life on your own. Whatever you think you'll accomplish will just lead to your pride. And it really won't be anything truly accomplished. It'll be a stack of cards. House of cards. 2 Corinthians 9:8. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times you may abound in every good work. See, this is the God of Genesis. Let me read that again. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times you may abound in every good work. I shared a quote last week from C.S. Lewis where he talked about, at the moment of difficulty, we may expect that we are about to make a great discovery. In other words, at a moment of great difficulty, when you encounter your total weakness, whether it's to forgive somebody, whether it's to go get something out of bed after you just got in bed and somebody requested you to go get something downstairs. If you trust God, you're about to make an awesome discovery about the sufficiency of His grace. The disciples saw it over and over and over again with Jesus. Whether it was the storm on the sea, or feeding 5,000, 4,000, or healing, or caring for their salvation, Jesus supplied it all through the strength of His Father. And He will supply every need you and I have until we meet Him face to face. So stop relying on you and start when you encounter that moment of difficulty saying, God, I know you're going to show up, and so I'm going to walk confidently into this difficulty. Amen? Amen. I've got a song to play, and after the song to play, I'm going to just ask the musicians to come right up. It's a song I heard this week and on the radio, and it was so good. I was driving down to the hardware store, and I just waited in the car till it finished because I'm like, man, this is like great. And the idea of the words aren't going to be on the screen, so just listen close. But the idea of the song is stop trying to be a hero and just start doing, by God's grace, what's right in front of you. Because God doesn't need heroes. There's only one hero, and it ain't you. It's Him. Genesis proves that. So you just do what He calls you to do, and you'll be happy with the small dreams. So go ahead, Aaron, if you would.